Hello everyone. Thanks for coming in today. I hope your caffeine levels are holding up steady. We've got a long day of presentations ahead, so I'll do my best to keep this sharp, insightful, and not too heavy. My name is Namratha Guna, and I'll be presenting my dissertation titled From Roots to Repetition: Drivers of Domestic Abuse in Adults. This project was carried out as part of my MSc counseling at Bangor University. A huge shout out and thanks to Professor Fayshott for supervising this study. Why this topic? It has sparked from a lot of personal experiences, like I've interned in a quite few settings to understand where my interest lies. So then I've heard quite a lot of stories which included domestic violence, and my conclusion then was that people are lacking awareness, or it could be the shame that is associated, and culturally how it's not wrong, at least in my culture and the Indian tedious legal system. But cut to coming to here, I expected none of it, because all of this is there, people are aware, people are educated, people come out and say, and that is seen as a good thing, but still domestic violence existed. And I was also observing how abuse is framed differently across different contexts. So, what stood out for me is how often domestic abuse is misunderstood or is oversimplified. And that's where this project began for me, asking not only what happens in an abusive relation, but why it happens and why it keeps happening. So, the central question we four researchers explored was, what are the key factors contributing to the development and maintenance of domestic abuse in adults? And our aims were to identify recurring factors that drive and sustain abuse, apply theories to understand these patterns, also recommend counseling and policy responses that go beyond surface level solutions. Coming to the background and rationale, domestic abuse is a very prevalent issue. In UK alone, 28% of young women and 13% of young men reported experiencing intimate partner violence by the age of 21. That's more than 1 in 4 young people affected even before reaching full adulthood. It's often treated as something personal, a personal issue between individuals, but decades of research show how it is deeper, and it's shaped by cultural and structural factors. It becomes normalized in societies through cultural silence, gender expectations, and institutional inaction. When survivors are not believed, or when systems fail to intervene, the cycle of harm continues unchecked. We also noticed a gap in research that connects these broader sociological insights with what we do as counselors, how we understand, support, and advocate for survivors. That's where this project came in, to bridge theory and practice. So, theoretical frameworks. I grounded my analysis in three key theories. Social learning theory, which suggests that behaviors including violence and control are learned by observing others, especially during childhood. If abuse is witnessed or experienced early on, it can become part of a person's internal blueprint for relationships. Feminist theory that focuses on how patriarchal and gender hierarchies promote male dominance and female subservience. These ideas do not just influence individuals, they are built into institutions, media, and law, which makes abuse easier to excuse and harder to escape. Conflict theory that looks how power imbalances, particularly related to wealth, social class, and access to service. These these create conditions where abuse thrives. People with fewer resources have fewer options to resist or leave harmful relationships. Coming to the methods, this was a systematic review guided by PRISMA guidelines. We searched PsycInfo, PubMed, Scopus, and Science Direct for peer-reviewed studies from 2004 to 2024, focused on causes of abuses with counseling relevance. Inclusion criteria was English language empirical studies, focused on adults, clear focus on factors contributing to abuse, relevant to psychosocial or therapeutic contexts. Exclusion criteria was legal only or medical only studies. Editorials or non empirical papers were also excluded, studies that did not focus on abuse causes. Data collection and analysis. We use the SPIDER framework to guide the inclusion, which is a sample, phenomenon, design, evaluation, research type, to assess relevance and apply reflexive thematic analysis by Brown and Clark 2006 to identify patterns. At last, 15 high quality studies that addressed abuse were taken, and these formed the backbone of our findings. Coming to the key themes that are identified. Across the data, 8 core themes were identified. Socioeconomic factors are the first. Financial dependence was one of the most major risk factors. Abusers often restrict access to money or sabotage jobs. Systemic inequality then limits survivors' ability to leave or even stay safe. The second most common one is childhood trauma and adverse childhood experiences. Many survivors and even perpetrators have adverse childhood experiences like witnessing abuse or neglect at home or neighborhood. Abuse becomes normalized to them and shaping how they navigate through adult relationships. This directly supports the social learning theory. The next one is mental health and substance misuse. Though mental health issues, especially PTSD, depression, and emotional dysregulation, do not directly cause abuse, they increase the risk. Substance misuse acts as both coping mechanism and also a trigger. They aren't causes in isolation, but definitely they intensify vulnerabilities. The next one is gender roles and patriarchy. In many cultures, control by men is seen as acceptable or even expected. Women are socialized to endure and protect the family. This power imbalance is at the heart of feminist theory and helps explain why abuse persists and why leaving is so often so difficult. The next one up is technology facilitated abuse. Control has gone digital and out of limits. Abusers are now using GPS to keep track, social media, and even banking apps to monitor and isolate individuals. It's a constant thing, invisible, and extremely difficult to escape. Yet, it's still under recognized by the legal systems. Intersectionality and marginalization. LGBTQ plus individuals, migrants, and disabled survivors face dual vulnerability from abuse itself and how services respond. Stigma, mistrust, or past discrimination often prevent help seeking. Gaps in justice system. Survivors reported inconsistent police action, re-traumatizing court processes, or even being dismissed outright. Marginalized survivors face the most severe gaps. Systemic discrimination limits safety for marginalized groups, and law shouldn't just guarantee protection, implementation is the key. The discussion. What this shows us is abuse is multi-layered. It's not a personal conflict between two people, but a result of complex social and institutional patterns ingrained in us. For example, a person with childhood trauma under financial strain and failed by the legal system is much more likely to remain in an abusive relationship because these overlapping pressures don't just trap them physically, they distort how abuse is recognized, rationalized, and is endured. Theories also converge to explain how these interacting factors reinforce abuse. Abuse persists when systems fail to disrupt the conditions that sustain it. Cultural scripts also frame control as protection and silence as strength. Abuse is often disguised as protectiveness or done out of control or stress or as a pattern of disciplining or even tradition sometimes. So survivors may then stay because they are broke, scared, or simply do not believe that they'll be believed when the story is out. So they That's why we need both individual healing and wider reforms. Learned behavior and early trauma. Childhood exposure to abuse was a major predictor of later involvement in abusive relationships. Social learning theory says children internalize violence as a way of relating. Trauma theory says early adversity disrupts emotional regulation and attachment. Survivors often carry a distorted belief system about uh, love, trust, and conflict, making them more vulnerable to harm and emotional dysregulation. Trauma histories are linked to both victimization and perpetration. This highlights the need to see abuse with broader social and psychological contexts. There was a pattern in cultural situation, West versus communal societies. Abuse took different forms across cultures, but the impact was equally damaging. Western societies like UK and the US, in them most common abuse was emotional and financial control, masked by autonomy ideals. Survivors face stigma around divorce and dependence. Communal cultures such as Asian and African, the abuse was tied to family honor and social obedience. Survivors stayed to avoid shame and community fallout. In both contexts, women were most affected, but the social and psychological barriers varied. Feminist theory was strongly supported. Norms reinforcing male dominance and female silence legitimized abuse. Women often faced economic dependence, fear of retaliation, and social stigma. Men also experienced abuse, and here masculinity norms led to silence and underreporting, a hidden form of entrapment, also known as toxic masculinity, that caused this. Coming to intersectionality and marginalization, survivors from LGBTQ groups, racial minorities, migrants, and disabled populations faced compounded vulnerabilities, including discrimination, stigma, and inaccessible support. These identities made abuse more likely to be ignored or misdiagnosed, coupled with digital coercion via surveillance, cyberstalking, app based control. This is growing, and legal systems are still catching up to these modern abuse tactics and need to speed up. Structural barriers and practical constraints. Survivors often couldn't leave due to lack of income or job access, unsafe or no housing, fear of losing children or visa status, pressure from family and community to adjust was always there. Um, One study showed that 61% of survivors cited finances and housing as key barriers. Stigma, silence, and shame also was a bigger theme. Shame was a universal barrier. Survivors feared blame, disbelief, or social judgment. Gaslighting and coercive control led to question their own reality. Psychological entrapment was just as strong as financial or legal dependence, but this was not all. There are some limitations observed. Not all trauma survivors perpetuate abuse. Resilience and support mattered. Plus, male survivors' experiences demand a more intersectional feminist approach. Digital abuse challenges traditional theories. We need more models that incorporate tech, identity, and power simultaneously. Coming to the strengths and limitations of the study. Starting with strengths, the study had broad scope. 15 high quality studies across various populations was taken. The study also had clear methodology. It followed PRISMA, SPIDER, and Brown and Clark's framework for methodological rigor. The study also integrates theory with practice, not just explaining abuse but suggesting actions. The limitations included English only studies, which equates to cultural bias. There were gaps in research on trans, neurodivergent, and refugee experiences. Tech abuse was understudied, and there was variability in methodology across included studies. Jumping into the counseling implications. Now, while dealing with clients disclosing domestic violence, we might need to treat abuse more than just relational trauma. We might want to ask what systems shape this client's experiences to gain an understanding over what their beliefs are about domestic violence. Do they have access to support, housing, and legal protection? Learn signposting accordingly. What cultural scripts are influencing their choices? Also, as counselors, we have a chance to provide psychoeducation, use trauma and culture informed approaches, collaborate with housing, legal, and advocacy services, and most importantly, support clients reclaim agency without judgment. Future research. I would say more studies on marginalized communities whose voices are still not too often included in mainstream domestic abuse literature. Prevention policy and digital abuse. Prevention needs to start early in schools, homes, and policy. We may need more fund in education on reduction of poverty and improve housing. Also, studies on tech abuse are urgently running awareness campaigns and advertisements that promote empowerment over shame, not fear. Use diverse representation, center and focus on validation and access over blame. Takeaway message. Abuse is never just about one person. It's about systems, stories, and silences. If we want to stop the cycle, we have to treat the root causes: inequality, trauma, and broken systems, not just the symptoms. The role of a counselor. Our job isn't just to help people feel better, it's also to help them make sense of what happened to them, name injustice, and reclaim safety and power. We may not be able to fix the world, but we can help people survive it, challenge it, and maybe slowly change it. Thanks for sticking with me till here. Hope this was both grounding and energizing. If nothing else, I hope this gives us all more fire to go beyond the therapy room. Please do pop down your comments and questions, and I shall answer. Thank you.